Welcome to Better Teaching, Only Stuff That Works, a podcast for teachers, instructional coaches, administrators, and anyone else who supports teachers in the classroom. This show is a proud member of the BE Podcast Network, shows that help you go beyond education. Find all our shows at bepodcastnetwork.com. I am Gene Tavernetti, the host for this podcast, and my goal for this episode, like all episodes, is that you laugh at least once and that you leave with an actionable idea for better teaching. A quick reminder, no cliches, no buzzwords, only stuff that works. Very excited about my guest today. Today, we'll be talking to Francie Weinberg. She was born and raised in South Florida. She has a Bachelor of Science in Public Relations from the University of Florida and a Master of Science in School Counseling from Nova Southeastern University. Francie has worked as a high school counselor in public and private schools for nearly a decade. She now works as a high school counselor at an independent K-12 school. With a passion for helping teens navigate their most formative years, Francie is committed to building a school-wide culture of social-emotional wellness through loving accountability. She has also volunteered for the crisis text line and as a court-appointed guardian ad litem for children in the foster care system. I really enjoyed this conversation with Francie as we talked about many of the issues that students face today, children face today in our society, and also the challenges that teachers have in working with the students. So it was my pleasure to introduce you to Francie Weinberg. Francie, good morning. It's great to have you here. I say good morning, but you're in Florida.
Yes. Great to be here, Jean. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh gosh, my pleasure. And as I said in the introduction, that one of the reasons that I was interested in talking to you is, everything that's in the news today about the issues facing teens, teen anxiety, issues with social media, and just everything that all that impacts. So, as I said in your introduction, you've been a school counselor for 10 years.
Yeah.
How have things changed in those 10 years that you see?
Even in the past 5 years, we're in a wildly different world now than we were. I think it was spring semester two school years ago that AI really took off and it just permeated school. And so even compared to 2 years ago, I think it's a different ballgame than it was. But I was looking up some statistics on Ivy League acceptances, admission acceptances, and in the past 10 years, so from 2014 to 2024, acceptance rates have gone down a staggering amount. So Penn, for example, in 2014 was admitting 14.2% of its applicants, and in 2024, 5.4%. And really, all the Ivy Leagues have followed suit. And so I think America at least has become significantly more competitive in terms of college admissions. We really are cultivating what we want to see from students. And so I think they are sort of flocking to this online world as just a little bit of a safe haven, a little bit of a place where they're not being watched and having to perform perfectly, which, as we know, is ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you is because when I met you, you were talking about your job and you were talking about the issues that you would deal with these kids. And again, you're a counselor, you're a school counselor. And so we talked about two buckets of issues that the kids are dealing with that actually there's some convergence. One of them is what you talked about right now is the pressure of getting into colleges because what you're working in right now is an independent school where kids are expected to move on, if I recall.
Correct.
Okay. And so that's what many people think about a traditional school counselor is that they're going to help their kids get into college. But you're doing much more than that, aren't you?
Absolutely, yes. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to talk about the job without talking about college at all because ultimately that's sort of, I think, the finish line a lot of people are looking toward. But yeah, in terms of what it takes up day to day, it really is a very small percentage of how I spend my days.
Well, can you talk about, I know I was a counselor for a time and there's no such thing as a typical day, but can you walk us through some of the things that you're dealing with? Because again, one of the things that was interesting when I was talking to you, you're actually dealing with kids in a counseling type of relationship, not as just, get to class, young lady type of
Right,
thing.
right. So, it's the role of a school counselor, I think, has really changed. It sort of had this rebranding from being the get to class and your grades are terrible, you're never going to make it, to like, what is the finish line and how can we get you there? And I spend a surprising amount of my day really working with kids on dealing with anxiousness and nervousness around test taking, around just the amount that they have on their plate, time management, executive functioning, test taking strategies, ways to build retention and ways to study more effectively. And so that really is a big portion of what I'm doing. I think that there's a big gap in kids being taught how to study and learn effectively. And then even at the best schools, there's that gap. It's just we're not teaching kids, they're not learning how to learn, I think, in a lot of places. And then, of course, there's the more intense counselor stuff that, I know we've both dealt with, of really making sure kids are in an emotionally safe place to be able to learn. And then I do a lot of conversations with parents, a lot of conversations with teachers to help them navigate conversations with parents. And then the sort of meetings where everybody who has significant touch points with kids outside of the classroom, where we're coming together to share information because it's not all coming to me as the school counselor. I'm never going to be every student's first person that they go to. And so it's more important that they have that safe adult and that they're able to maintain those relationships, and then that information is sort of centralized. So a lot of that as well.
So you're talking about, how to learn, how to remember, you're talking about a lot of things that, we talk about at Ed Research and those, just those types of situations that, again, you think of more as classroom type of things. Do you do any work other than individual consultations with teachers? Like, do you do workshops on different things for kids and for the teachers?
Yeah, so I do both work for teachers in terms of how to how they can be the most effective as teachers. And so a lot of times I'll do, but it's not a ton of that. Like I think there's so much competition for time, for teachers' time, for students' time, that, there's one or two school counselors in a school. I think if the role of the school counselor was more important, and the idea of it really was to sort of build out support for teachers, both supporting teachers as themselves and in doing their work, there probably would be a different role or more school counselors or some sort of adjustment, but it's not the case. So I'm not sure that tends to be sort of the priority of any school that I've been at, or really even any model that I'm familiar with.
Do teachers, one of the things that is interesting to me whenever there's an issue in our society, gosh, this is going to, there's no cliches allowed on this, but this is going to sound cliche. Everything gets, shoved down to the teacher to take care of. Like for instance, have to do social emotional learning.
Mhm.
There's curriculum for teachers. Do you think the teachers have enough training or are equipped to handle a lot of what we're asking them to do with the kids these days?
I think I started shaking my head like midway through your question. Just no, absolutely not. And it's nobody's fault. Again, it's this competition for time. So I mean, think about what these teachers are up against. They have sometimes 30 kids in a classroom. They have 45 minutes with the kid. They have an entire standardized curriculum to get through that's being interrupted for grade meetings and for somebody to come talk about not drinking and driving and everything that can be jammed into school. We're jamming into school and still expecting tremendous pass rates from teachers. And then saying also teach them to be socially and emotionally well, right? How is that fair? I mean, that's not their job. That's what I went to school for. It's not what they went to school for. So I just think what we put on teachers to get done in a day in a school year is, I mean, it's really, it exceeds, I think, expectations that happen in most jobs.
Okay, so you have defended the teachers in this because the other place that this falls, because it falls on the schools, is because, well, the parents should be doing this. The parent, do you think parents have the skills? I mean, here you have a master's degree in what you do. Do parents have the skills to support their kids in what they need? What's your thoughts on that? Or is that why you have a job?
My my gut reaction was to say, I think parents think they have the skills to do that. I think a lot of parents are in this tricky spot where, of course, they know their children best, and it doesn't necessarily mean they know what's best for their children. And that can be a tough thing to grapple with. And so, while no, I don't think many parents have the skills to teach their kids really to be have like a strong psychological immune system. And part of that is my role as the school counselor is to give parents the skills to both for themselves to model for their kids and to teach their kids. But I often think that they don't have the skills, and many of them still tend to think it's my kid and so therefore I know best. And I understand that mindset. And I also know that there are people in education who've been doing this for 10, 20, 30 years who have degrees in it, who really, this is what we know and this is what we do. And, there's part of me that wants to say, when you enroll your child in this school, you are trusting this organization's educational expertise. And so just have a little bit of faith in us.
Well, you talked about knowing best, parents knowing their kids best. But we're in a time now where nobody seems to know what's best. And I think, talking about social media, the impact of social media, and I can't help but go back, do the timeline of when you were talking about when things began to get worse. And it seemed your 2.5 years would put us right after COVID and smack dab, between COVID and social media. How's social media impacting your work? How do you see it impacting your work, which really means impacting the kids? Because we hear about it all the time in the media. Is it being overblown in the media or no?
I think that's obviously a really complicated question. If it wasn't, we would have one answer and we would know what to do. I think that there are ways that social media has sort of become this boogeyman where we're making it out to be terrible in every way. And while I think that there are a lot of ways that social media is terrible, I also know I understand why kids have turned to it in the way that they have. I think teenagers have always sort of done the revolutionary thing that adults are afraid of, and that's always going to be part of it. And and then there's the layer of parents modeling healthy social media use, which I don't think is happening either. And so it's really hard to talk about teens on social media without talking about what they're seeing at home. I found in a Pew survey in 2020, 68% of parents report sometimes or often feeling distracted by their phones when they're spending time with their children. And so it makes me wonder why we expect teenagers to act differently. in terms of the way that I see it in schools, I don't think it's that kids are unable to have conversations. I'm not seeing kids incapable of looking adults in the eyes and forming complete sentences. And that's really not what I'm seeing. But what I am seeing is this comfort that comes from hiding behind a screen, sort of taking down any real desire or need to be polite. I think it's damaged the ways in which we communicate and the value we place on being thoughtful about our words.
So when you're working with students, are there students who you're working with that you will work on those particular skills?
We have to, because there's this idea, I think when you're in an online community, and it's very easy to enter and exit, right? Jonathan Haidt called it a low bar for entry community, where you can enter easily, you can block anybody easily, you can leave at any time. And so there is no real skin in the game in terms of, rectifying mistakes or apologizing for saying something in a way that might be hurtful because they're low barrier communities. And in schools, in a classroom, the relationship you have with your teacher, the relationships you have with your administrators, those are high bar for entry relationships. And so you have to be thoughtful about those things. And I think kids at this point, because their lives are so intertwined with the internet, they don't really note that difference as kids and teenagers. And so I mean, we have to work on it. I can't tell you the number of times I've had to say, like, you can't call your teacher bro. It doesn't matter how frustrated you are. And it doesn't matter that when you're frustrated and you're texting, you say, bro, come on. You can't then turn around and say it to your teacher.
Yeah, I hope you also tell them, don't call them dude.
It's way more bro than dude these days.
It is, you know, of course, okay, here's boom alert coming. I just can't. That is one of there's a place I shop. Boy, this really is a bird walk. There's a place I shop and I walk in and it's not busy. It's a supplement store. And there's a young person behind the counter. And as soon as I walk in, it says, "Hey, bro, can I help you, bro?" You know, and in the court, I know exactly what I'm going to get. I get the same thing every time. I'm in 2 minutes, and I'll get five bros, in 2 minutes. But you know what I don't get? Thank you, thank you.
So
Uh,
I,
see you, bro. And so that's one that really has gotten me. So
I think
thank
you
you, thank you
perfectly
for your
illustrated my point. Thank
yeah,
you.
thank you for your work in that space.
I'm,
Actually, I wasn't listening to
just trying to
you.
be a hero.
Yeah, well, and your survey with the Pew survey was 68%. I have a feeling that there's at least 25 to 30% of parents lying about that, or don't even realize that it's happening, because that's how much things has permeated our daily lives. We don't even think about it.
Do you know you can track your pickups on your phone? So the number of times a day if on an iPhone, you can see the number of times you pick up your phone. I think we pick up our phone. You do that thing where you pick up your phone to look at the time and you put your phone down and then you're like, what time is it? Do you ever do that?
It's it's scary. Pick it up to look for something, but yeah, it's all the time. And so I really, that's why I wanted to talk to you. I mean, like, God, is it as bad as we think it is? And is it just, I think the kids, like you say, they have conflated how you communicate online with how you communicate in person. I know had Dr. Rodriguez on recently talking about his experience with like late teenagers as they were doing job interviews, that people would interview in their pajamas, or walking down the aisle at Costco, because they just don't know how to communicate beyond this social media. Uh,
I thought that was incredible where he was talking about how he has them start the interview with their camera off. And I I mean, it is shocking to me that's necessary, but it is, and I can't help but feel like that was a byproduct of COVID, where they really did sit in their pajamas. I mean, I we did teacher orientation on Zoom and there were teachers in bed. So while I feel that no amount of global pandemic would ever end up with me doing a Zoom from my bed for work, I know that my judgment is not everyone's. And so now things have to be taught that we didn't really ever expect to have to teach. But it's a different world. Zoom interviews didn't exist not that long ago.
So then I get back to teachers again. So we had a survey with regards to parents and their what they reported with respect to being interrupted by their phones. How do you think do teachers, and I don't know where you would see this except maybe in a staff meeting, how, or do you see the same distraction level with the teachers?
I really do. I really do. And that's what makes it so tricky. So, this year, I think a lot of schools moved toward a phone ban, and a, a lot of schools were sort of just making like blanket policies on what they wanted to do. And one of the things that the school that I'm in decided to do is no phones in academic spaces. So in any of the academic hallways, any of in the auditorium or the library. And when we're in the auditorium, I mean, I see kids and adults alike on their phone. And everybody has stuff to do and everybody's busy and everybody has responsibilities. And, especially for teachers, again, I can't help but defend them when they get a free moment in the day, which is so rare. Of course they want to take a look at their phone. Everyone does. And so again, if everyone does, that's where I feel that how much of our concern we've directed toward teenagers might be a bit misplaced. I think we could spread the wealth of that concern to non-teenagers as well. I mean, I've seen parents in parent-teacher conferences pick up their phones and start texting and take phone calls and everything you can imagine. And it's really the same behavior.
No, I agree. It is so pervasive. And that's why, I really wanted to talk to somebody who's with kids all the time to see if it is different, because it's really hard to try to put down rules that you yourself don't follow. Because I mean, you think kids don't pay attention to that?
Kids kids are always all behavior is learned, I think. If kids are learning from what they're seeing all the time, they're learning from their teachers, they're learning from their parents, they're learning from what they see on social media, and that is such a big chunk of it. If they're learning so much from what they see on social media, isn't it then more important for us to model behavior that's different? We know that's the information they're getting. They're getting this sort of constant feedback loop on social media of this is good, this is fun, this is positive. If we then want them to do less of that, then that's the behavior we need to be modeling when they're not on their phones. And I think we tend to fall into this trap of saying get off your phones and then just quickly checking ours and putting it down.
So, so you're working in a school right now that it's an independent school, but you also, as we said in your introduction, that you volunteer with a crisis text line. So is that what it sounds like? Is that you are actually texting people in crisis? Is that
So people in crisis text in, and then those of us on the receiving end we're on a computer. And so I'm doing it, I'm not texting, but I mean, it's the regular crisis text line that is on, when in the last county I was working in, all of the students had the suicide hotline and the crisis text line phone numbers on the back of their student IDs. So
uh,
it's that crisis text line. And I mean, I think we get we have so many people texting in saying, like, are you real? Is this a robot? Is this AI? They, and that's how like 40% of the conversations start.
Okay, but just to clarify, you get it, somebody texts in, but you also respond digitally. The response is
It's
digital.
correct. So nobody's talking.
Wow. I mean, that's interesting. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to fix. You know, the anonymity, you still have anonymity, but at like double blind, it's double blind. Here you are on a text.
It is, and it's tricky in terms of if there is somebody who's at risk, we're really sort of depending on them to give us that information because it is anonymous. Any information that they share with us is voluntary. So sometimes they'll say, "Are you comfortable sharing your name?" And they'll say, "No, I don't want to." And that's fine.
Wow, that must take a whole lot of skill because I mean, I hate sending emails because the tone can be misread and why do here, let me read this email that I just got. And then like you make up how awful this person was on the other line. How do you mitigate that with text? Or you just become skilled at it, knowing or
I think so there's a training program. You go through a training where you're having conversations with robots. And by conversations, I mean you're typing with them and
uh
they're responding. And so there's a training, and then you do get skilled you do get skilled as you continue. But also, to be clear, it's not a skill that feels to me like it translates into emails because I have the same experience that you're describing when
yeah.
I'm answering emails still, and I don't, it's just a different headspace, I think.
Okay, because you know that they're entering in the conversation in crisis, in looking for some. It's just,
And
yeah.
it's a different my role is different. My role is to get them from crisis to a calmer place where they're able to safely go about the rest of their day or night or whatever it is, versus, you work for days and days on a project and then someone sends you back an email that says thanks with a period. You're like, this can't be right. So
Yeah.
it's just not the same.
So so now taking those crisis issues and then comparing, contrasting to issues that you deal with, anxiety and things in schools, is there overlap? Are you seeing some of the same issues? Are there issues that you may have in students that don't manifest when you're talking to them as crises, but you kind of can see that they are? You know what I'm asking? Is it
Yes,
okay?
so I made a QR code for students to scan when they want to meet with me. And just for my own information, I asked them to rank the urgency low, medium, or high. The urgency is shockingly high. I mean, it's the same rank if I'm worried about a friend who's in crisis or my math class is not going well. Both of those are extremely urgent in the eyes of a teenager. Also, on the crisis text line, we're really the job there, and the job is to provide support for whoever needs it. But it was born out of a need to respond to people in crisis who maybe either aren't comfortable picking up a phone, aren't in a place where they can have an out loud phone conversation, and they really need that support. And what I see there, like what I see in schools, is that I think people have a hard time understanding really what it means to be in crisis. And that's okay. That means that their barometer for crisis is low, and that lucky them, that's a good thing. But the issues sort of range across the board in both places, from things that really are a crisis to things like my parents are really mad at me and it feels like a crisis because
Yeah.
I am a teenager and I don't like it.
Yeah. And my parents won't get off the phone to talk to me, or they
and
won't
and
nothing.
that.
They won't respond to my text. Yeah. One of the things that was talking, I want to talk a little bit about trauma-based education, and One of the things that was interesting to me when I was doing my master's in counseling was, how things were diagnosed, how maladaptive behaviors were diagnosed. You got your manual. I don't know, people know there's a DSM, and I don't know what the latest is, but it's a diagnostic
At
statistical
13
manual.
now.
Is it 13? Okay,
I think it
wow.
might be.
And so a therapist, a counselor will look at this manual, and it has a list of manifestations of this behavior. And if you get 4 out of 6, then you have it. And so seems like a funny way to diagnose. But having said that, the point that I was going to get to, and I will, is that at the time, I don't even remember what was going on at the time, but they said 90% of the population has this, maladaptive behavior. Well, it seems to me if you're using a statistical manual to diagnose things and 90% of the population has it, it means that it's not, by definition, it's normal. And how do we do that? And so that's sometimes how I'm wishy-washy on the whole trauma-based stuff. What is it, the ACEs, that is kind of the diagnostic statistical manual
Mhm.
for, how bad trauma is. Are we looking at that in a funny way, or what's your thoughts about that?
It's interesting that you ask that. I started my master's program where I live in Florida, which is the same county that Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is in. So I started my master's in August of 2018, and that shooting happened in February of 2018, so 6 months earlier. And a lot of the professors that I had at the time were they were part-time professors and full-time directors of school counseling, directors of middle school counseling, directors of high school counseling. And they were the first people to go back into the school when the school reopened to meet with students to start working on that trauma informed counseling. And so my degree and learning in the classes that I took sort of came with this as the backdrop. It was really hard to separate what we were talking about from this really significant trauma that had just taken place in our area. And so I my education may be unique in the way that I think the way I was taught about trauma and the way we talked about it was, I mean, that it's not, I don't feel like that's something that we take lightly here with our students. And so, you know, I think like anything else, and like we were talking about with social media, there's these things that gain steam and start rolling forward of where we want to, the words we want to use, the pedagogy we want to align behind, and because it sounds good. And this trauma informed therapy and school counseling, I think, has the opportunity to be a lot of hot air, but I'm lucky in that where I am, it really isn't. It's really sort of fundamental to the training that we get, and in a very realistic way, in a way that's like, this is what you need to look for, this is what you do when you see it, and this is how we move forward.
Francie, that's a distinction. Okay, what you just described, that's a pure distinction. And everything you talked about, your training in counseling, dealing with trauma-informed counseling, how much does the classroom, again, this gets back to what we're asking classroom teachers to do. I know I was at a training for new teachers. These are brand new teachers, and they had to learn about trauma-informed uh, teaching. And I'm thinking, holy cow, they don't know about anything. And now you're shaking your head. So tell me what you're thinking about this, what we're asking teachers to do.
No, I mean, I think it's the role of a teacher. I think we really need, we're at this strange time where parents who do believe that there are experts in the field which is great, are maybe too comfortable outsourcing parenting sometimes. And so they have a sort of a team of people working with their kids. The kid has therapists and tutors and executive functioning skills coaches and a college counselor and all of these people whose job it is to support them. And the idea that that's the role of the school, the job of the teacher, the role of the classroom, that is where kids go to learn the subject that they are learning. And if we want to make it the responsibility of the school to teach kids how to be good people, we need a lot more hours in the day and frankly a lot higher salaries. I mean, it's just it's parents still need to be parents. And so teachers can be teachers.
You know what, Francie? That might be the perfect place to end this. It is, Francie, it is always a pleasure talking to you. And I'm sure we'll talk again. Hopefully we'll see each other soon. And do you
Thank
have
you
any
so
questions?
much,
Do you have any
Gene.
questions for me?
I do. I was wondering about your time as a school counselor and now as a coach, sort of what experience are you able to draw upon to use in your coaching that you maybe used or honed as a school counselor?
Well, as I read, as you know me just enough to know that I'm a contrarian, type of person. And I read a lot of, I have read a lot of books about counseling, not counseling, I'm sorry, coaching, instructional coaching. And a lot of the pages in those books are devoted to communication. And I think I just, well, two things about that. One, some things that they ask instructional coaches to do as a counselor, I wouldn't have touched, just like you're talking about, that it's just way too demanding. So even as a trained counselor, I don't go there. I don't want to get into those things with Francie. I like you, go see a therapist. Go see a
Yep.
therapist. That's not my job. So it has helped me in communication. Uh, it has told me that I need to listen occasionally, and you know how tough that is for me, that I need to listen. But I think that's been the biggest impact is those communication skills and having some empathy for people. I mean, like you said, you know, teachers are doing a lot of work. I mean, they're asked to do a lot of things. We can't just go in there and pretend to know everything. And I know some school, when I had school counselors, that's how they were. They knew everything and they wanted to let me know that they knew everything. And so that's been the biggest thing for me. It's a big part of what's necessary that I didn't have to relearn. And
What's your number one tip as a coach for a school counselor? Just give me one for the book.
you talk about working with adults
Working as a coach, what would you tell me as a school counselor?
as a school counselor, don't give any advice until you know the situation. And I think adults should give advice. I'm no Rogerian there. I mean, hey, I've been through this. I understand it, but you need to
Mhm.
understand the issue. And you need to understand, like I want to give you a pat on the back here. Before I talk to somebody, before they're a podcast guest, I send them a little prep sheet. And one of the things I always ask is, where are you on social media? Where can people find you on social media? And you said, no social media, walk the walk. And I think that is great advice for counselors. Don't be, I mean, I knew high school counselors who were trying to tell kids not to drink and were alcoholics. You truly do have to walk the walk and you could still have a fun life.
Thank you so much, Jean.
Hey, Francie, it's been a pleasure. Talk to you soon. We'll see you soon. If you're enjoying these podcasts, tell a friend. Also, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. You can follow me on Blue Sky at G Tavernetti, on Twitter, X, at G Tavernetti, and you can learn more about me and the work I do at my website, tesscg.com. That's TESSCG.com, where you will also find information about ordering my books, Teach Fast, Focused Adaptable Structured Teaching, and maximizing the impact of coaching cycles. Talk to you soon.